Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. The transport pod hissed open, releasing a puff of sterilized air into the equally sterile arrival bay. Ray Jenkins stepped out, inhaling the metallic tang that permeated Vienna's atmosphere processing systems. He shouldered his duffel bag and looked around at the geometric precision of the terminal, all sharp angles, seamless transitions, and not a single decorative element in sight. "Welcome to Planet Efficient," he muttered to himself while running a hand through his permanently shoveled brown hair. A green-skinned official approached, tablet in hand, eyes scanning Ray with mechanical efficiency. "Engineer Raymond Jenkins of Earth, identification confirmed. Your punctuality is noted and appreciated." The official didn't extend a hand or even nod. Such gestures were considered wasteful on Verdiana. "Just, Ray, is fine," he said, flashing a smile that the official didn't return. "And thanks, I tried to be on time." Interplanetary travel makes a better first impression than saying, "Sorry, I'm late, my shuttle got eaten by a space whale." The official's expression didn't flicker. Humor, without practical purpose, is discouraged in public spaces. "Your assigned quarters are in Residential Sector 7, Unit 42B. Your work assignment begins at Planetary Cycle 1, 3 tomorrow. Do you require nutritional sustenance?" Ray fought the urge to roll his eyes. "I'm good, thanks. I had some nutritional sustenance on the shuttle." "Very well. Follow illuminated pathway 17C to your accommodations." Ray trudged down the indicated path, passing dozens of green-skinned Videhants going about their business with synchronized precision. Nobody was chatting, nobody was laughing, nobody was even looking around. They moved with purpose and nothing else, like components in an enormous machine. His quarters turned out to be a minimalist box, a bed, a workstation, storage compartments, and a sanitation unit. Ray tossed his bag onto the bed and pulled out a crumpled NASA t-shirt, shaking it out before hanging it prominently in the storage unit. At least it added a splash of color to the monochromatic space. "Home sweet sterile box," he said. SED, the central energy facility of Vienna's capital city, loomed like a massive crystalline structure, power conduits and energy pathways visible through transparent sections of its walls. Ray whistled as he made his way through the security checkpoints, earning disapproving glances from the facility staff. His supervisor, a tall Verdiana named Thorx, met him at the primary control hub. "Engineer Jenkins, your punctuality is appreciated." "Second time, I've heard that since I landed." Ray replied, "You guys must really have a thing for watches." Thorx's face remained impassive. "Time efficiency is fundamental to Vidian progress. Your assignment is to upgrade the quantum fluctuation stabilizers in Sector 12. Tools have been prepared according to Earth standard specifications." "Sweet, point me to the coffee station first and I'll get right on it." Thorx tilted his head slightly. "There is no coffee station. Stimulants are distributed only at designated nutrition intervals." "You're kidding, right?" Ray groaned. "How does anyone function without coffee breaks?" "We function with optimal efficiency because we are not constantly interrupting our work for unnecessary consumption," Thorx stated. All right, Sector 12 it is." 3 hours into his shift, Ray sat cross-legged on the floor of a maintenance junction, singing "Rocket Man" under his breath while recalibrating a particularly stubborn power regulator. "Come on, baby, don't fight me on this," he said to the machine, tapping its casing affectionately. "We both know you'll feel better after the upgrade. Why are you speaking to the equipment?" Ray jumped, nearly dropping his calibration tool. A female Verdiana stood watching him with an expression that wasn't quite the blank mask he'd seen on everyone else. She wore the distinctive emerald-trimmed uniform of a high-ranking official and intricate jade markings, track patterns across her shoulders and upper neck. He scrambled to his feet. "Just a little Earth tradition. We talk to machines sometimes, it helps with the troubleshooting." "How can verbal communication assist with nonsense and technology?" she asked, head tilted slightly. Ray shrugged. Honestly, no idea. But when you call a stubborn engine a worthless piece of junk, it usually starts working again out of spite. Her brow furrowed. Machines cannot experience spite, that's exactly what they want you to think. Ray grinned, then caught himself. Sorry, more useless Earth humor. I'm Ray Jenkins, Energy System Specialist. I am Lurie Daw, of High Counselor XOX. She studied him with startling emerald eyes. I am conducting facility inspections as part of my diplomatic training. Ray noticed, despite his efforts not to, that Lurie was stunning by any planetary standards, athletic build, perfect posture, and features that somehow managed to be both striking and delicate. He quickly averted his gaze, remembering the briefing about Vian and attitudes toward physical appreciation. Well, don't let me keep you from your inspection, Ray, she said, turning back to the regulator. Though, fair warning, I've made unauthorized modifications to this junction. Unauthorized modifications are prohibited, Lurie stated, moving closer. What have you done? I added efficiency parameters that weren't in the specs, Ray explained, pointing to the regulator's display. See those numbers? Your system was wasting about 3% energy through heat dispersion. I tweaked the superconductor alignment to recapture it. Lurie leaned in, studying the readings with rising surprise. This is not standard procedure. Standard procedure isn't always the most efficient, Ray said, surprised to find himself using Vidian logic. Earth engineers are taught to improvise. Improvisation introduces variables and potential failure points. Lurie countered, but sometimes those variables lead to breakthroughs. Her voice, however, lacked conviction. Ray resumed his work, reattaching the regulator's casing. Think of it as controlled evolution instead of chaotic improvisation. To his surprise, Lurie crouched beside him, watching his hands work. Your methodology is unusual, yet your results exceed expected parameters. That's basically my entire performance review history in one sentence, Ray laughed before Lurie could respond. A loud crack echoed through the junction, followed by a surge of blue electricity across the conduit above them. A power coupling had ruptured, shooting a deadly arc of energy directly toward where Lurie knelt. Without thinking, Ray moved his arm and shot out, grabbing Lurie and yanking her backward as the energy discharge scorched the floor where she'd been just milliseconds before. They tumbled backward together, Ray's arms still wrapped around her shoulders as the rogue electricity dissipated into the emergency grounding system. Alarm klaxons wailed, and emergency containment fields snapped into place around the damaged coupling. Are you okay? Ray asked, smiling with relief as he helped Lurie to her feet. She stared at his hand on her arm, then at his face, her expression unreadable. That manner of physical contact is highly inappropriate, she said stiffly, though something in her eyes suggested curiosity rather than offense. And your facial expression is unnecessarily expressive. On Earth, we call it a smile. Ray released her arm but maintained eye contact. You should try it sometime. Smiling without purpose is considered, let me guess, inefficient. Precisely, Lurie replied, though her posture had changed subtly and her voice softened. However, your rapid response likely prevented serious injury. This raises questions about the value of spontaneous physical action in emergency scenarios. That's a very technical way of saying, thanks for saving me, Ray replied. Gratitude is implied in the acknowledgement of beneficial actions, Lurie stated, and then almost imperceptibly, the corner of her mouth twitched. But yes, as you would say on Earth, thank you. Security personnel flooded the junction, followed by repair crews and administrators demanding reports. Ray and Lurie were separated, each questioned extensively about the malfunction. By the time Ray finished his incident report, Lurie was gone. Over the next week, Ray noticed Lurie appearing with increasingly transparent excuses to observe his work. First it was routine inspection follow-ups, then integration protocol verification. By the fifth day, she wasn't even bothering with pretexts anymore. Your methodology for power grid synchronization is unorthodox, she commented, watching him bypass an unnecessary safety redundancy. "That's a nice way of saying, I'm breaking all your rules," Ray replied, not looking up from his work. "If it helps, we have rules on Earth too, I break those as well." "Yet your results consistently exceed efficiency projections," Lurie noted. "This creates a logical inconsistency in our operational doctrine. Maybe your doctrine needs updating." Ray suggested, "Sometimes the rule book needs a rewrite." As he finished, the bypass power readings immediately stabilized, showing a 4.2% increase in throughput. Lurie's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. That assertion would be considered borderline seditious in certain contexts. "Good thing we're just talking about power grids then," Ray winked. Later that same day, Ray found himself whistling while reconfiguring a junction box. To his surprise, he heard Lurie behind him attempting to mimic the tune, badly. He turned to find her standing there, looking almost embarrassed. "The vibration pattern you produce seems to correlate with increased work efficiency," she explained quickly. "I was attempting to reproduce the effect." "It's called whistling," Ray said. "And it doesn't make me more efficient, it just makes boring work less boring. Boredom is a productivity impediment." Lurie reasoned, "Therefore, eliminating boredom increases productivity." Ray laughed. "That's some Olympic-level mental gymnastics to justify trying something fun." "Fun is not the objective," Lurie insisted, though her eyes betrayed her. "Optimization is the objective." "Sure it is," Ray nodded, playing along. "Just like I talk to machines for troubleshooting purposes and not because it amuses me." The next day, Ray caught Lurie whispering to a diagnostic terminal when she thought no one was watching. 2 weeks into his assignment, Ray was making his usual unauthorized coffee substitute in a maintenance closet he had converted into an improvised break room. He'd rigged a heating element to warm reconstituted earth coffee powder he'd smuggled in his personal effects. The resulting brew was terrible, but it was better than nothing. The door slid open, and Ray froze, cup in hand, expecting Thorks or another supervisor. Instead, Lurie stood there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "This is clearly an unauthorized utilization of maintenance resources," she stated. "Busted," Ray said. "In my defense, I'm 62% more productive with caffeine, I have not reported this violation." Lurie stepped in, closing the door behind her. "Nor do I intend to," she said. Ray raised an eyebrow. "Withholding information from authorities doesn't seem very wide of you." "I find myself increasingly conflicted regarding certain regulatory standards," Lurie admitted. "Your presence has introduced inconsistencies in my established thought patterns, I tend to have that effect on people." Ray grinned, offering her the cup. "Want to try it?" "Fair warning, it's terrible." Lurie eyed the cup suspiciously. "Consuming non-approved substances is, let me guess, inefficient and potentially hazardous." "Correct, it's just coffee." "Lurie, humans have been drinking it for centuries. We're still around." After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the cup and took a cautious sip. Her face contorted in what Ray could only describe as confused disgust. "This is extraordinarily bitter," she managed, handing the cup back. "Yeah, good coffee didn't make it into the diplomatic exchange program budget," Ray laughed. "But it's still better than no coffee." The concept of consuming an unpleasant substance for its secondary effects is peculiar. Lurie said, "Yet I find myself curious about other Earth customs that might appear equally inefficient at first assessment." Ray studied her face, realizing what she was awkwardly trying to say. "Lurie, are you asking me to show you how Earth people do things? I believe a comparative cultural study would be educationally valuable." She said formally, then added with startling directness, "Your behaviors are inefficiently fascinating. Ray Jenkins, would you be willing to provide a private educational demonstration of Earth customs for diplomatic purposes?" Of course, Ray nearly choked on his coffee, coming from a Viadian, especially one of Lurie's status. This request bordered on scandalous, yet her eyes held genuine curiosity and something else he couldn't quite name. I'd be happy to launch a cultural exchange program. Ray replied with a slow smile, for diplomatic purposes, naturally. Excellent, Lurie said, with the faintest hint of what might almost be called excitement in her voice. Shall we begin tomorrow after standard operational hours? My quarters in the diplomatic residential sector would provide appropriate privacy for such educational activities. Ray couldn't help but laugh at her phrasing, which on Earth would have sounded decidedly suggestive. It's a date, he said, then quickly corrected himself, I mean, it's an appointment, a diplomatic appointment. I shall prepare accordingly. Lurie nodded and turned to leave at the door. She paused and looked back. Ray, your smile, it is not entirely inefficient. It appears to serve some function I have yet to fully comprehend. With that enigmatic statement, she was gone, leaving Ray staring after her, wondering exactly what he'd gotten himself into. Ray spent the entire next day oscillating between anticipation and panic. What exactly did cultural education entail when the student was a high-ranking alien from a pleasure-phobic society? He'd already violated at least 12 Vidian protocols just by inviting her to his quarters. If anyone discovered our planned meeting, Ray muttered to himself while reconfiguring power relays, you're overthinking this, Jenkins. It's just cultural exchange, totally legitimate, completely professional. By shift's end, Ray had transformed his sterile quarters into something resembling a human habitat. He had unpacked all his Earth contraband, string lights now draped across the ceiling, vintage band posters, Arctic Monkeys, Radiohead, and his guilty pleasure Taylor Swift's 50th anniversary tour, a small sound system, and various knickknacks that made the space distinctly un-Vidian. When his door chimed precisely at the agreed time, Ray's heart raced like he was 16 again, waiting for his prom date. Lurie stood in the corridor, glancing nervously over her shoulder before entering. She wore standard Vidian attire, a minimalist tunic in subdued green, but had removed the formal insignias of her rank. I have informed my security detail that I am conducting independent research at the Central Archives, she explained. We have approximately 3 standard hours before my absence becomes questionable. 3 hours to introduce you to fun, Ray nodded. Challenge accepted. Lurie surveyed the transformed room, her emerald eyes widening. Your living space is chaotic, welcome to the Earth Embassy, unofficial, Ray announced, gesturing grandly to his humble room where fun isn't just allowed, it's encouraged. Lurie approached a poster and studied it with scientific intensity. These humans are holding primitive amplification devices, and their facial expressions suggest either intense pain or significant emotional distress. That's Arctic Monkeys in concert, Ray laughed. And those expressions mean they're really into the music they're playing. Music, Lurie repeated the word as if testing its weight. Viridiana has sonic alignment tones for work productivity, but I understand Earth music serves no practical function. That's where you're wrong, right? Said Ray, activating his sound system. Music's function is to make you feel something. Ray started with classical Delon, filling the room with gentle piano notes. Lurie stood motionless, her eyes gradually softening as the melody progressed. The mathematical precision is acceptable, she conceded. There appears to be a logical progression to the tonal variations. Switch to jazz next, Ray said. Miles Davis's So What, the walking bass line and loose structure clearly puzzled you. Lurie's brow furrowed, but halfway through the track, Ray noticed her right foot tapping slightly in rhythm. She followed his gaze downward and froze. Staring at your foot with alarm, this rhythmic pattern is causing my body to respond without authorization, she said, looking genuinely disturbed. Ray fought back a grin. That's called feeling the beat. It's completely harmless, except to your dignity if you have no rhythm. Is this a typical human physiological response? Lurie asked cautiously, allowing her foot to resume its tapping. Absolutely, wait till you see this, Ray said. He stood and began dancing, nothing complicated, just moving with the rhythm. Lurie's eyes widened in horror. Are you experiencing a seizure? Should I summon medical assistance? This is dancing, Ray explained, continuing to move. It's how humans express enjoyment of music physically. On Viridiana, such movements would be interpreted as either a mating display or signs of severe neurological distress, she explained. Seriously, on Earth it's Saturday night at any club, Ray countered, extending his hand. Want to try? Lurie stared at his outstretched hand. Physical coordination for non-productive purposes is, she began, then surprised him by taking his hand. An interesting anthropological experiment, Ray guided her through basic movements, trying to ignore how her touch sent electricity through his fingers that had nothing to do with the facility's power systems. At first, Lurie moved with robotic precision, copying his movements exactly. You're thinking too much, Ray said. Dancing isn't about perfect execution, it's about feeling. Feeling is inefficient, Lurie responded automatically, but her movements gradually became less mechanical. That's it, Ray encouraged. Sometimes inefficiency is the whole point. After several songs, Ray showed her how to high-five. The first time their palms connected, Lurie jerked back as if shocked. That was unusual, she said, staring at her hand. A sensory response had occurred that was not unpleasant. Just wait, Ray grinned. The night of human inefficiency was just getting started. Next came card games. Ray taught her poker, which Lurie mastered in minutes, calculating probabilities with frightening precision, all while insisting she was merely engaging in statistical analysis exercises. When Ray demonstrated simple magic tricks, making a coin disappear and reappear behind her ear, Lurie launched into a detailed scientific deconstruction of sleight-of-hand principles until Ray placed a finger gently against her lips. Sometimes the magic is in not knowing how it works, he said softly, withdrawing his finger when he realized how intimate the gesture was. Lurie fell silent, staring at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. I have a confession, before meeting you, I had accessed restricted Earth cultural files. I was curious. You're a rebel underneath all that Vidian efficiency, aren't you? Ray smirked. Perhaps, she admitted. My position grants me access to historical archives most citizens never see. Did you know Viridiana wasn't always this way? 3 centuries ago, before the Great Rationalization, our society celebrated collective experiences that appear similar to your fun. What happened? Ray asked. Resource scarcity led to the efficiency revolution. Emotional expression was deemed wasteful. Personal pleasure was categorized as selfish resource allocation. Lurie's voice carried a hint of sadness. Within 2 generations, our ancient celebrations were forgotten. Ray considered this. That's pretty heavy stuff. I think we need to lighten the mood. He moved to a small device in the corner that he'd kept covered. What is that apparatus? Lurie asked with scientific curiosity. Returning this, Ray said with theatrical flair, revealing a compact freezer unit. It is humanity's greatest achievement. He produced 2 bowls and scooped what appeared to be a white, frozen substance into each bowl. What is the purpose of this frozen substance? Lurie asked suspiciously. Just taste it, Ray encouraged, handing her a spoon. Lurie studied the ice cream, as if it might be radioactive, then took a minuscule amount on her spoon and cautiously placed it in her mouth. The transformation was immediate and electric. Her eyes widened to their fullest extent, her green skin flushed a deeper emerald hue, and then a sound escaped her, something between a gasp and a moan, so primal and unrestrained that both of them froze in sudden, awkward recognition of its intensity. That was, she stammered, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. Just wait till you try chocolate, Ray said with a wink, his collar suddenly feeling too tight. Lurie stared at the bowl, then took another spoonful, this time closing her eyes as she consumed it. The sensory experience is overwhelming, she whispered. How is this not standard practice throughout the galaxy? Some pleasures are worth traveling across space for, Ray replied, watching her enjoy each bite with growing fascination. Over the next 2 weeks, their cultural research sessions became frequent and increasingly daring. Each night, Lurie requested new Earth experiences. They watched comedy videos that made her cover her mouth to suppress unauthorized laughter. They built a fort out of blankets, a completely impractical defensive structure, she noted while clearly enjoying herself. They played Earth music loudly and danced with growing abandon. Ray taught her to high-five, fist bump, and eventually to hug. The first embrace lasted perhaps 2 seconds before Lurie pulled away. Physical contact for non-medical or non-reproductive purposes is strictly forbidden, she whispered, yet the neurological response was remarkable. Humans are tactile creatures, Ray explained. We need physical contact for emotional health. Perhaps Vidians once did as well. Lurie mused during one session while explaining Earth social customs. Ray demonstrated a casual shoulder massage. The moment his fingers pressed into her tense muscles, Lurie made a sound that nearly stopped his heart. Her body arched with such force that she knocked over a nearby chair. Is this what Earth humans do regularly? She asked, breathlessly, for recreation. This is just the G-rated stuff, Ray joked, not realizing she wouldn't understand the reference. G-rated? She questioned. Never mind, Ray backpedaled. I just meant humans have lots of ways of experiencing physical pleasure that aren't about reproduction. Fascinating, Lurie murmured. Her eyes never left his. Our historical archives suggest similar practices existed on Verdiana before they were classified as dangerously inefficient. Their meetings expanded beyond Ray's quarters. Using her security clearance, Lurie brought Ray to abandoned sections of the city where they could explore without surveillance. In one such area, she showed him ancient murals depicting Vidians dancing, embracing, and celebrating in ways now forbidden. My research suggests a correlation between the suppression of sensory pleasure and declining innovation rates, Lurie explained, tracing the faded images. Creativity requires inefficiency, the exploration of unlikely possibilities. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, Ray teased, though he knew it meant more than she could imagine. As weeks passed, Ray noticed Lurie changing subtly. Her movements became more fluid, less mechanical. She occasionally used Earth idioms, once he even caught her humming a Beatles song. More alarming rumors circulated about the High Counselor's daughter acting irregularly. Thorks warned Ray that his Earth mannerisms were excessively influential and reminded him that cultural contamination was a serious offense. Ray knew they should stop. The risk grew daily, yet every moment with Lurie felt more valuable than his own safety. The tipping point came during their 19th session. Ray had introduced Lurie to Earth dance music, specifically disco, which she found rhythmically optimal. They spun around his quarters, laughing as Ray taught her the hustle. Your civilization rejected this art form, Lurie asked incredulously, executing a perfect spin. The 70s were complicated, Ray laughed. They were dancing closer now, Ray guiding her through more partner-focused moves. The proximity was intoxicating, her scent reminded him of something like cinnamon and ozone, distinctly alien, yet increasingly familiar. Suddenly, Lurie stopped dancing. Ray, she said with uncharacteristic directness, in my research of Earth customs, I encountered a practice I found particularly interesting. What's that? Ray asked, still holding her hand from their dance. A gesture called kissing, she said quietly. Is it true humans press their mouths together as a sign of affection? Ray swallowed hard. That's correct. The files classified it as a primitive biological bonding mechanism. Lurie continued, stepping closer. But I suspect there's more to it. Definitely, Ray managed, acutely aware of how close she stood. I would like to experience this custom, Lurie said, her scientific tone belied by the intensity in her eyes, for comparative cultural understanding. Before Ray could formulate a proper response, before all the protocol violations and cultural boundaries could be listed, Lurie leaned forward awkwardly. Her lips met his in a clumsy but earnest first kiss. Time suspended, the universe contracted to the single point where their lips connected. Ray had kissed women before, but nothing like this, a kiss across species, across worldviews, across everything that should have kept them apart. Lurie pulled back slightly, her eyes questioning. Was that correctly executed? My research materials were limited. Ray laughed softly. It was perfect, he whispered, leaning in to show her a slightly different approach. Their second kiss deepened, Lurie learning with her typical rapid precision. Ray's hands found her waist, pulling her closer as her fingers tentatively explored his hair. The searing blast of the door disintegrating interrupted them like a bucket of ice water. They sprang apart as 6 security officers stormed in, weapons trained on Ray. Behind them, a tall, imposing Vidian in formal council robes stepped through the smoldering doorway. Father! Lurie gasped. High Counselor Zavo surveyed the room with cold disgust, the earth decorations, the music still playing, the remains of some food on the table, and, most damning, his daughter standing breathless and disheveled beside the human contaminant. XOX ordered, in a glacial tone, 2 officers, seize Ray. Citizen Raymond Jenkins, the security chief announced formally, you are charged with cultural contamination, sensory corruption, and moral degradation of a counselor's daughter. The penalty is exile, or worse. Father, this is my responsibility, Lurie stepped forward. I initiated the cultural exchange. Silence, Zavo, thundered the High Counselor. You have been compromised by earth depravity. Medical purification will be arranged immediately, medical purification. Ray struggled against his restraints. What the hell does that mean? He managed. Zavo didn't spare him a glance. Remove the human to detention. Full isolation protocols, the trial will commence at next cycle. As they dragged Ray from the room, he caught one last glimpse of Lurie's face, a mask of horror, as 2 medical officers approached her with what looked disturbingly like neural equipment. Lurie, he shouted, whatever they do, remember, feeling isn't wrong. The last thing he saw before a stun baton sent him into unconsciousness was her emerald eyes, filled with something that looked revolutionary on a Vidian face, raw, unfiltered emotion. Ray woke in a detention cell that made his quarters look positively extravagant. The space contained nothing but a hard sleeping platform and a sanitation unit, the walls glowed with a faint antibacterial blue light that made his eyes ache. No windows. No sounds. Perfect isolation. His head throbbed where the stun baton had connected. Ray sat up, wincing as his muscles protested. How long have I been unconscious? Hours? Days? The perfect timelessness of the cell offered no clues. You've really done it this time, Jenkins, he muttered, testing his limbs. Nothing broken. At least, his thoughts raced to Lurie. What was medical purification? It sounded ominously like brainwashing. Had they already erased her memories of our time together? The thought carved a hollow space in his chest, one unrelated to his physical injuries. The cell door slid open with a clinical hiss, and 2 guards entered. Their faces were impassive beneath their helmets. Prisoner Jenkins, rise and comply, the taller one ordered. Good morning to you, too, Ray replied, struggling to his feet. Any chance of breakfast before my execution? Nutritional requirements have been met by atmospheric supplementation, the guard responded humorlessly. The tribunal awaits. They secured his hands with energy restraints and marched him through a series of identical white corridors. Ray tried to track their path, but the deliberately disorienting layout made it impossible. Finally, they arrived at a massive set of doors that slid silently apart. The tribunal chamber was a perfect hemisphere with 7 elevated seats arranged in a semicircle. Light filtered from above, harsh and unforgiving. An observation gallery circled the perimeter, filled with Vidian whose expressions ranged from clinical interest to undisguised disgust. Ray was positioned in the center on a small platform that rose slightly from the floor, a stage for the accused. 6 of the 7 council seats were already occupied, the 7th, the central position, remained empty until a side door opened and High Counselor Zbox entered. He took his seat without acknowledging Ray's existence. This tribunal is now in session, announced a disembodied voice. The accused, Raymond Jenkins, is charged with cultural contamination, sensory corruption, and moral degradation of a citizen of prominence. XOX finally looked at Ray, his gaze cold and analytical. These are serious charges, Earthman. The maximum penalty is a neural reconfiguration followed by permanent exile. Do you comprehend the gravity of your position? Neural reconfiguration. Ray couldn't hide his horror. You mean brain damage? We mean correction, another counselor clarified. Removal of destructive tendencies that threaten our social harmony. Ray swallowed hard. Where's Lurie? What have you done to her? Citizen Lurie is undergoing corrective therapies, Zoc stated flatly. Her temporary aberrations are being addressed. The word temporary ignited a flash of hope in Ray. Perhaps they hadn't completed whatever process they planned for her. The evidence against you was comprehensive, continued the tribunal moderator, as holographic displays activated around the chamber showing recordings of Ray and Lurie's cultural education sessions, dancing, laughing, sharing food, and finally, the kiss that had triggered the raid. Several counselors visibly recoiled at the intimate footage. Do you deny these actions? XOX demanded. Ray straightened his shoulders. No, I don't deny them, but I reject the premise that they constitute crimes. Explain, demanded one of the female counselors as she leaned forward with surprising interest. Look, Ray began, I understand Verdiana values efficiency, but true efficiency isn't about eliminating pleasure, it's about harnessing it. Humans didn't become the spacefaring civilization we are by being joyless automatons. We innovate because we feel. We explore because we wonder. We connect because we care. Primitive emotional reasoning, dismissed another counselor. Verdiana achieved technological superiority through disciplined focus, not self-indulgent pleasure-seeking. Did you? Ray challenged. Because from what Lurie showed me, your ancient civilization was both joyful and advanced. The great rationalization didn't make you more efficient, it just made you less human. We are not human, Zoc snapped, and added, and your human values have no place in our. A commotion at the main entrance interrupted him.